Welcome to Interfaithing,
a podcast for and about Jewish and Christian interfaith families,
where we explore the question, why families embrace two faiths under one roof.
I'm Ari, the son of a rabbi,
with a degree from the Jewish Theological Seminary.
I'm Anna, the daughter of a minister with a degree from the Union Theological Seminary. We were co-teachers together at the Interfaith community in New York.
And 1 year of working together led to 15 years of friendship and collaboration.
To find us sitting here today, embarking on a new project.
Whether you are part of an interfaith family,
or you're exploring and interested in how different faiths interact with one another,
this is the space for you.
Subscribe to guarantee you never miss an episode.
And help us spread the Torah and gospel of interfaith wisdom far and wide.
And you'll also gain access to exclusive content like our holiday live stream events.
We hope you enjoy every episode.
Listen at your own pace.
Share with a friend.
And don't forget to subscribe.
This episode, we are unpacking the myth of they just don't mix together.
It's like oil and water. They are just fundamentally different.
For a full introduction to this episode, please check out part 1. And now, let's get to part 2. Are you ready for our next story?
Yes.
All right, let's get this party going. Now we're going to take it to the next level.
My name is Kate DeAngelis, and I am Catholic. And my husband, Josh Zippin, is Jewish.
Kate and her husband, Josh, are part of the Interfaith book group we introduced you to during part 1 of this episode.
I was born and raised in the Catholic Church in Maine and still attend church locally every Sunday. Whenever I travel, I look for local Catholic churches that I can make it to conveniently. And Josh was raised in a Reconstructionist congregation that his family started. So we're both pretty well connected to our respective religions.
Like in part 1, we have another story of an interfaith couple trying to find clergy to officiate their wedding.
And yet here we are. We just celebrated our 1-year wedding anniversary.
And here is Kate on the importance of finding clergy who do not fudge their traditions.
So we managed to have both a priest and a rabbi co-officiate together our religious ceremony on a Saturday during Shabbat. It had to be inside a structure, though. That was one of the stipulations from the church, was that it couldn't be just outside in the beautiful garden area. It had to be inside in a barn, which was okay in the summer heat in Maine, and still lovely. But finding our clergy, as far as the Catholic side, I initially had reached out to my family priest that I grew up with, going to, what are those religious retreats like Journey and other things in high school with my religious groups in middle school and high school. And he is still there in my hometown. I said, this is so exciting. I want to get married. And none of my cousins or anything got married in the church or were really affiliated with the church. And so it was disappointing for my family. And they were really looking forward to, have someone present and be really part of the church. So this was the opportunity. And I said, my partner is not Catholic, but I would still like to have a Catholic wedding. In terms of what can I really, always pictured myself walking down an aisle in a church and the music. And I felt that communion was important, but I also, recognized and made a sacrifice that didn't make a lot of sense to do that by myself or in front of people, that not everyone would do it. And not being in a church was okay. I thought about having 2 ceremonies. Could I do one in a church on Saturday afternoon and then one outdoors? But then it's like you have a Catholic wedding, then you have a Jewish wedding, and that didn't feel right either. And this priest, sorry to bounce around a little bit, he had a lot more restrictions. He is a little more conservative, being from Maine, not very, he's friendly with the Jewish community in Maine, but it's small. And they might celebrate a Seder together or a Shabbat dinner, but he doesn't know too much about them. They don't know too much about him. Then I realized also that what you're traditionally supposed to do is go to your closest church. Like that is where you are affiliated. And so I went to my closest church that I've been going to every Sunday. And I just spoke with the priest there out of curiosity to say, what's the process? Because I'm legally in New York State, so I would need to get dispensation from New York State anyways to be married in Maine. So I connected with him, and just by sheer luck, this priest, Father Baker, was so cool and with it. He had a best friend who was a rabbi, and they perform interfaith weddings all the time. He knew exactly what to do. He's like very into it. He knew when to say amen when the rabbi is speaking in Hebrew. And let's see. So Father Baker, excellent, totally knew what to do. He said, these are the steps we have to take. And he's not fudging anything. When he at first said that, we have to have it in a structure. Is there a structure on site? I was like, well, yeah, there's the barn like 20 feet away, but we'll still do it outside, right? Like I thought he was just checking the box. Like, no, it still had to be inside. He wasn't joking or fudging around there. And I'm like, okay, like that's great. It just makes me reassured that, we are doing this properly and still in such a beautiful way where he understood and respected everything. And I felt a little bad for my home priest to kind of cut him out of the situation, but this was technically right. And being married by my local priest, getting the dispensations from my local congregation. And I just happened to have him travel up to Maine for a nice vacation.
So I never knew that in the Catholic tradition that you have to be married within a structure, which I found to be very cool to kind of hear a little bit more about that. And as part of the ways of just learning about the different faith traditions and hearing these stories, the notion of being married in a structure and being married under a chuppah that has open sides, I think that there's so much there as a way of connecting through those differences between what a chuppah and what a structure kind of look like.
Mm-hmm.
But there were a few things that I found to be really interesting in regards to the question of they don't mix. A lot of the families that you and I have encountered through our teaching and serving want to do it the right way. Like there's a desire to say we want this to be authentic, just like anyone would, right? And it's not about finding the lowest common denominator or just I don't really care that much. Because again, if you really want to find a way to incorporate both, it's because it speaks to you as something important that you want to transmit. And that may look different in different ways. For some, it's having a primary religion. And for others, it's having both as equal. It could be going to family for certain events. And for others, it's really about making something kind of in the home, but that there's a lot of intentionality associated with it. And so in thinking about it from the perspective of clergy in regards to what their requirements are and how valuable it is for the couple to know that the clergy isn't, fudging it, which is why I found the story fascinating about finding a rabbi to do it on Shabbat. Maybe the priest wasn't fudging, but was the rabbi fudging by doing it on Shabbat? So just as a kind of a little bit of a background to that, the issue with doing a marriage on Shabbat is that Shabbat is a day of rest from creative activity, meaning like it's not just about taking long naps and not expending any energy. There are plenty of Shabbats in which I'm really tired afterwards, especially as a rabbi and serving a pulpit. You can be very tired at the end of a Shabbat. So it's not like it's inherently a day of full on rest, but it's a day where you don't create something new, because just as God stopped creating, so too should we stop creating. When you are officiating in a marriage, you are legally creating a union between two people in which their status is now different. The way that affects itself in a Jewish wedding service is by giving the ring and also signing the ketubah. Those two particular acts are violating the laws of Shabbat by virtue of using the document and using the rings to create this new union that is happening on Shabbat. So I don't know much about when Catholicism allowed priests to marry somebody who is Catholic and a different faith tradition. But in regards to marrying a Gentile within Jewish law, the rabbis of the Talmud especially centered on how one should not marry someone who came from that tradition, even if they had converted. Meaning that even someone who is, let's say, an Aramean or a Canaanite or Hittite, those are folks who are kind of carrying baggage from their faith traditions, and therefore marrying them is not valid at all. Is that you should not be marrying somebody from that who has that ancestral link. But when it came to the actual marriage with somebody who identifies with a different tradition, in Masechet Yevamot, which is a part of the Talmud, a rabbi by the name of Rava said that those kinds of marriages are not valid at all within Jewish tradition. That there is no valid marriage within Judaism for marrying somebody of a different faith tradition, which means that there's no inherent violation of committing a wrong on Shabbat if you end up marrying somebody like that on Shabbat, because that marriage is not valid in the Jewish way of thinking at all. So it's as if to say, right, it's as if to say, okay, fine. So you decide to marry somebody who's not Jewish. All right, you a rabbi, you want to do that? All right, just so you know, it doesn't count. And so anything you do on that day, whatever, doesn't matter. And it's a fascinating way to say that the laws that kind of seemingly are there to prevent the relationships between Jews and non-Jews, or in this case, the marriages between Jews and non-Jews, can be, in a kind of a roundabout way, used to do whatever you want because it doesn't count. And I think that there's something about that that allows for freedom for rabbis or for clergy in general who are interested in this work to say, you know what? It may be that my denomination, my fellow colleagues will not agree with this and will think it's just totally not valid at all. But you know what? I think that there's some value here. And because they don't see validity with it, it doesn't change the fact that I see validity with it. And because there really are no guidelines for this, I have the freedom, the ability to be creative to make this work. I can make it work.
Wow.
Yeah. Crazy.
Yes. Being willing to, as you said, be creative, like the novelty of finding a way, and still in a way that, at least to the individual, like faithful.
Right. How to
And
make
not
it faithful
just
within your context.
Right. Like you as the clergy to have a thoughtful, faithful process. You know, if my colleagues were to ask me about this and challenge me on these points, this is how I would have to respond to them. Not to try to prove that others should begin to do it that way as well. But like, if you asked me, like, what resources did I draw from, you know, did I honor my tradition in coming to this conclusion? And hopefully for those clergy, if they are able to say confidently, yes.
Right. I have something to offer.
Yes.
And by virtue of simply saying, no, it's not valid, Jewish tradition paradoxically gives space for rabbis to be creative in exploring how interfaith marriage could be valid.
Yeah. Well, it's just one of my favorite things. And it's for myself, being in graduate school, like choosing to study theology and kind of take it beyond just the experiences of my childhood. Paradox came up for me as one of the things within Christian theology that was my favorite, right? Because if only, it allowed me to be able to say, there isn't going to be a clear-cut, binary, wrong, right, like judgmental answer to every single thing. Sometimes the whole purpose is to stand in the gap between two things that seemingly do not mix, that cannot be reconciled, and to stand in that gap and say, but I'm here.
I love that. And I love that because it is something so deeply faithful about simply saying, I am here.
Mm-hmm.
I am present. It's what Abraham said when God called to him. It's what Jacob said when God called to him. It's that knowledge that I am just standing here, taking in what it is that I am seeing and
Mm-hmm.
sensing, and being willing to engage.
Yeah. Yeah. To do the best of our abilities, capacities, to faithfully do our best with the time that we are given,
Right.
to recognize that our humanity is fallible, and that, again, in Christian scripture, I think one of my favorite things, right? Like the disciples are messy, like they make mistakes, they get it wrong so often, and yet they are the special 12 who walk alongside Jesus in this very particular way. And so that expression of humanity, of like, yeah, you're going to make mistakes along this path. You're going to have to encounter things and have the courage to say, I don't know. And
Yeah.
so I have to, coming back to the point about humility, stop trying to find an answer so that the thing that is above me, the thing that is beyond me, that is greater than me, that is responsible for all of this, can move.
Yeah. I think that knowledge of that sense of moving and of growing and of being able to walk alongside or walk together, it can't exist with a perspective that there is the right answer.
Yeah.
It's that there's always something more to learn. There's always something more to grow. I am not going to have the answer, but I want to go along the walk with you. I want to go along the journey with you. And if there's anything that our religious traditions focus on, it is that knowledge of journey, of going from one place to another. And it's not about reaching the destination, but about what it is that we gain over the course of that lifetime.
Exactly. Yeah.
And I think in many ways, what we're trying to do in these episodes and really looking deeply at some of these myths is that each of these myths about why interfaith relationships just won't work, just don't work, or any of that, it's because those myths are centered on, well, there is an answer. Right? There is something that we can say for sure about this.
And don't you dare say something different.
But I think that one of the reasons why I really like that example of Rava from Masechet Yevamot in the Talmud about saying there's no valid marriage at all with a non-Jew is that by virtue of saying no, it actually creates the space to be creative as to how to say yes.
Exactly.
And that's what's so fascinating about religion. It takes these no's and it gives us the opportunity and the creative space to say, how can we?
Exactly. And if only to take it even further, in history, so many examples of people being told, you can't believe that, you don't have a right to exist. But like the very act of survival disproves that and shows that this journey is always about, turning the corner and seeing what is going to be next, as opposed to standing in one place, looking behind and assuming that you're done.
Right. By the way, if I ever want my children to actually be creative and to find a way to do something, I just tell them no. Like you can't do that. And they're like, oh,
exactly.
Right. He told me no. I'm going to figure out a way. I'm going to do this.
Exactly.
Right. It's the best way to be creative. Just tell them no.
Yes, absolutely it is.
All right. You ready for your last story?
Yes. Let's do Benjamin's.
I'm Jewish. I grew up Jewish. My wife, Jackie, is not Jewish, Christian. We moved to New York. One of our close friends was part of the interfaith community, but they brought us in.
Given the fact that the founder of the Interfaith community in New York has passed, Benjamin, and maybe some others there in New York are kind of stepping into a leadership role in a different way.
If we want to sort of honor the traditions, we want people from the opposite religion to feel as comfortable in our events as those from the religion itself. So we want the Jews to feel comfortable at Christmas and Easter, and we want the Christians to feel comfortable at the high holidays and Passover.
All right, here we go with Benjamin Siegel of the Interfaith community in New York on the topic of access to clergy.
I think there used to be a short list of Jewish and or Christian officiants or clergy. Historically, many wouldn't do it unless there's some level of conversion involved. Now there's many. So like you could pretty much call any church within sort of 40 blocks of here, and half of them would say, sure, come in, we're open to the idea. And the synagogues might well be the same. Obviously, the Reform synagogues more than the conservative and the Orthodox. So that's not a constraint. And you can meet people online, and you can, rabbi travel, priests will travel, and depending on where you live, you may have a choice of dozens of clergy within your area who'd be happy to officiate at your baby naming, at your engagement party, at your wedding, at your whatever it might be. And part of it is church membership, synagogue membership. I haven't seen the latest stats, but I'd be surprised if it was growing. My hunch is there are a few very strong communities. Everybody else is struggling, and so if you're the priest of a community where the numbers are not strong, then you're open to all ideas, because otherwise you're going the wrong way. So I think people are open to ideas and energy and being open, and we're the long arc of history is to be more open-minded over time rather than less.
Yeah, so in talking with Benjamin, it was very fascinating to me thinking specifically about the interfaith community, the IFC, which was the organization that I worked for, that we worked for so long, and also to hear from Benjamin, who is now a part of the leadership, which has changed due to the passing of the founder of the interfaith community, Dr. Sheila Gordon. And so getting to kind of check in with representatives from the IFC, how do they feel about the question of clergy, access to clergy? How are they helping other couples, whether or not they are members of the IFC itself, but they are being reached out to with these questions? And it was just pretty fascinating to hear how Benjamin answered the question that, at least in the New York metropolitan area, there, in his view, is no lack of options and resources for folks. Right. And also what he said there at the very end, connecting it to clergy openness to working with interfaith families being a part of survival, relevancy, kind of even how these congregations keep their doors open. And that was a very interesting perspective that's very practical, and touches on something else within this conversation that I think kind of pulls us not completely away from the theological underpinnings that you and I are focusing on in this episode, but also back to the day-to-day of the churches, of the synagogues, of the organizations represented by these clergy. Yeah, the communities.
Yeah. I remember a rabbi spoke at a convention I went to a little while back, and talking about this issue primarily from the perspective of we're losing our people. We're not going to become relevant anymore. And that is, I think, a particular piece of the idea of go out and see what your community is doing. Because if you don't know what the people are doing, if you don't know what is motivating them or that's on their minds, how can you really be a clergy person? How can you really be able to help them in their moment of need? And, I think that I'm curious if because I can't help but go back to the theological. Just,
Oh, of course. Of course.
but like, I've always been curious about the story of Jesus in the New Testament of pastoring to lepers and to the communities that were not getting any kind of religious leadership, and how Christianity, was the sister religion of Judaism that said our goal is to reach out to the non-Jewish world, right, to Gentiles. And so it's about extending to folks who may have felt disenfranchised before or are not generally considered to be a part of the community. And so on one hand, it's about that welcoming. We also heard from Rabbi Debbie and Reverend Sam, right, of finding a place that you to be welcomed in. There's a sense of the practicality of the health and well-being of religious institutions. But I'm also left wondering, even though there are a great number of clergy out there who would do different kinds of life cycle events for families, it doesn't feel that there are really many resources or really many places in which the religions are in relationship to one another, are trying to build community together. There are a handful, and we hope on this program to be able to highlight as many of them as we can. And if you're listening and you know you're a part of one, please let us know more about your community. How does your community connect to both religions that are in the home? Some of the stories that I've heard in preparing for our episodes, that there is a sense of loneliness, that people have to rely upon each other in like small groups or a handful of couples together to try to figure it out. And so if we're good at being able to get clergy to kind of find the theological language to become comfortable in their own ways, and that we are good at being able to understand that this is not a third way, but this is about holding faith traditions authentically together, and that there's creativity to be found even in the space of that has historically been a no. How do we create community that can be sustaining over the long term, so that people have places to go wherever they may be? And one of the hopes that I know that you and I have with this podcast is that we can start really being able to share this message a little bit more broadly, and try to create that network so that there are more resources available for families, for community, for budding communities, to be able to provide educational materials, to connect to individual clergy and others. But it takes a village. And the willingness to be able to do that is from professionals, it's from donors, it's from lay folk who want to engage in it. And I think even from stakeholders in the more traditional arms of the different faith traditions, because we all share that idea of maximizing the amount of our traditions that can be passed on and that can be shared and that families can use to grow, and that can be done in many different ways. And so there is value in being able to recognize that if we want to create a more united community overall, and if we want our faith traditions to be able to be more robust in this new world, then we need to work more closely together to be able to make that happen.
Yes, absolutely. I was just reminded of a phrase that one of my professors in undergrad actually used to talk about particular periods of history where the church needed to circle the wagons, so to speak, right? So bringing that like image, the metaphor of like, imagine that you're traveling in a caravan, and if the caravan comes under threat, like one of the ways that you protect the caravan, the assets, etc., all the things that are with you, is to form a circle and put the important things on the inside and then defense on the outside. And that there have been these like ebbs and flows throughout Christian history, and I would extend that more broadly to like religious history, where sometimes you feel the need to circle the wagons as a means of preserving your traditions, and other times again, it's that paradox. If you only ever stay in that preserving circle the wagons, you actually threaten the robustness, to use your word,
Right.
the growth, the relevance of your tradition.
Right.
You snuff it out.
Yeah. That element of circling the wagon feels safe and feels good at times because things are clearer.
Mm-hmm.
Things are more black and white.
Mm-hmm.
But a path of growth and a path of nuance, path of humility, path of curiosity requires a flexibility and a willingness to move forward, move out and about.
Yeah.
And to know that the wagons that you protected are always going to be a part of you.
Yes. Yeah. And,
Right.
even in that metaphor, like a caravan does not exist to form a circle and then just be on the defensive all the time. A caravan is actively journeying. It is actively moving from one place to the next, whether because you're following resources or, whatever the whatever the purpose of the caravan may be, but it is a journey.
Mm-hmm. It is a journey. Got to have some good horses to take you on that journey.
Oxen, some
Lots of sheep,
cattle, a lot of sheep, some
absolutely.
donkeys. Yeah.
You need all the animals you can get.
All of them.
All right.
Yes.
Well, this has been such a pleasure to be able to talk about what it really means to find a way to make these two religions work. And it's so exciting to be on this journey with you, Anna. And I know that you feel the same way, but
I do.
I hope you do at least.
I do. I started by saying how excited I was to be on this journey, and you just bookended us by repeating that sentiment. And it bears repeating. The excitement is very real. It
Mhm.
is enlivening to be in discussion with you, and then by extension to also get to hear these other voices and see and feel all of the different ways that people are sitting with these questions, and also opening themselves up to let us, be a part of their lives.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Thank you for listening to part 2 of episode 1. They don't mix. They're too different.
We hope you learned and laughed with us.
Subscribe to guarantee you never miss an episode.
And we want to thank our supporters and contributors, our families, and all of our featured storytellers.
We also want to give a special shout out to our composer and music producer, Pablo Langain.
Subscribe, share, leave a review, and send us a message. We would love to hear your feedback and to learn more of your stories.
Find us on any of your podcast platforms to subscribe, and you can also find us on interfaithingpod.com.
Like and follow us on Facebook and Instagram.
And if you really like what you hear, please consider supporting us financially at patreon.com/interfaithing.
So until we meet again, take care
Stay curious,
and
keep
keep
interfaithing.
interfaithing.